Okay, hi, this is Jay Fidell. We're on ThinkTech Hawaii. Today is Monday, and we're doing Island Perspectives. And this is a special show with Ben Sullivan, who is the Clean Energy Commissioner of Kauai, and he's on the hookup through Skype from Kauai. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Aloha, Jay. Thanks for inviting me onto the show.
Great to have you here. I would like to talk about Clean Energy Day. You spoke at Clean Energy Day in one of the panels there, and we had a lot of people there. We had 180 plus people there, and it was a very vital kind of program. A lot of people had a lot of ideas, but I wonder about your impressions of it. I wonder about your impressions of the takeaway. This was on July 12th, 10 days ago. So tell us your view of it, and tell us, you can summarize what you talked about anyway, yeah?
Sure. I appreciate the opportunity. You know, one of the things that Hawaii Energy Policy Forum does a great job of is getting the neighbor islands to kind of speak to each other and share ideas, and also to stay connected with what's happening on Oahu. So, you know, for me, it was an opportunity to share with people some of the things that are happening on Kauai. And did that really briefly, but there's a lot of exciting opportunities over here. We are working hard to strengthen our collaboration with our utility cooperative, KIUC. As many people know, that KIUC is really just doing an incredible job getting renewable energy onto the grid, and they're dealing with the challenges as they face them. You know, one of those is photovoltaics in terms of grid penetration, and then there's certainly a lot of other challenges as well. They just put in their smart meters, and there was some community concern about that, but that's moving forward. Otherwise, the County of Kauai, I work for Mayor Carvalho, and he's really doing some great things, pushing the clean energy agenda inside the county. So Mayor has his Holo 2020 vision that lays out a lot of aggressive components for clean energy for Kauai. A lot going on. One of the things that Mayor committed the county to last year was joining up with the Better Buildings program. Jay, I don't know, have you heard of the Better Buildings program before?
No, not in those terms. I mean, I heard a lot about many building programs, but not the Better Building. What is it about?
The U.S. Department of Energy has a program called Better Buildings Challenge, and what it is it's a network that facilitates municipalities making a commitment to reduce energy use in their buildings by 20% by the year 2020. And what they do is a lot of information sharing, a lot of networking and resource tool sharing in order to help municipalities achieve that. And they do a pretty good job. We signed up last summer and thought, we can do this, and these are in line with our goals at a minimum, so let's do it. And Mayor was right there to say, yes, we're ready, and we can make this commitment of resources and be sure that we hit these targets. And we've been going full steam ahead, and we've learned a lot from the program, and we're certain that we're going to be able to hit the goals, if not exceed them. So that's one example of something that's happening on Kauai that's very exciting. Something that's happening on Kauai that I think, in my sense from Clean Energy Day, was happening throughout the state is there's really, a culture change and a shift in a lot of organizations, just in terms of the number of people paying attention and doing the work, and the way the work is getting done, and the amount of collaboration that's happening across agencies and across departments in order to solve some of these complex problems we have with clean energy. So, overall, I think that's what the event was about. That's what we shared internal to our piece of the sector of the action, as it were, and that's what we heard from a lot of others as well.
Well, I thought that your presence there and effectively the participation by the neighbor island and the presence of the neighbor island commissioners and all that was a kind of statement. I mean, I'm looking for sea changes. I'm always looking for sea changes, and here we are in an initiative that is critical to the state. It's really important. A lot of people are involved. It affects everyone. And the question is, how is it going? Faster, slower, more popular, less popular? Has the public really, got a necessary understanding? Is the government remembering what they promised? Is industry online for this? I mean, all these questions always come up, and that's why I think clean energy is useful and important, because it gives you an opportunity to get a reality test on what's happening with all these issues. And one of the issues is the neighbor islands. Are they connecting with Oahu? Are they connecting with each other? Because I think you ultimately need that. And so I felt, as I had felt before, and it's really around your involvement, Ben, that the neighbor islands are closer to Oahu and closer to the statewide initiative than they have been in the past. Do you agree with me?
I do, and I think there's really some interesting analogies between, the role that the neighbor islands are playing in Oahu and in the system itself. I mean, I think, we have come from a place where the utility sector was based on a centralized model, and the flow of information, the flow of electricity was one way. Mm-hmm. That's now changing in the electricity sector. It's also changing, as you know well, in the way that the grid is looked at. I mean, I think we've seen a lot of issues come up around the state about the cable and about different initiatives, and I think there's been a really interesting discourse as to how to solve those problems. We've heard from people on Lanai and Molokai with their challenges. We've heard from people at a policy level in the state saying, hey, we need to solve these problems. And ultimately what it forces a necessary conversation on how are we going to deal with impacts, how are we going to solve these challenges. And they're going to be in our backyard as a state. So how are we going to mitigate impacts and distribute them equitably and all those kind of things. So really, really interesting conversation for sure.
Well, it is a statewide conversation. When somebody said to me earlier today that if you wanted to transmit power from the state of Utah to the state of Colorado, for example, nobody would think for a minute about crossing the state lines. Nobody would question that. It's just part of the program. On the mainland, all the transmission crosses state lines. But in Hawaii, we have trouble crossing county lines. Now, granted, there's water in the middle, but it just seems to me is that we really have to look at this as a statewide initiative, and we have to compare. It's not just a matter of learning from each other. It's a matter of coordinating our efforts and looking for best practices wherever they appear.
Sure, absolutely. And it's easy for me to say because here we are on Kauai, and we don't foresee being connected to the physical island-wide grid anytime soon, but certainly there's a lot of connectivity as far as policy and as far as resources. One of the initiatives that the state is obviously doing a great job on that we're excited to be a part of is the OnBill financing program, which we're expecting to see out next spring. So this is the first time that KIUC has participated in what have previously been the third-party administrated efficiency programs through Hawaii Energy. So we're looking forward to that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point because that's a common denominator that affects all the islands and affects KUIC the same way it affects HECO. And you guys can move it forward the same way HECO can move it forward. And maybe actually your way of implementing it could teach us, that is the HECO crowd, a better way of implementing it. I mean, it's a sort of an interesting comparison to see how one side implements it as against the other side. But I think it applies equally to everybody, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely. We can all figure out how to bring down barriers, and that's what that program is about. So we're looking forward to success over here. I can't say for sure how it's going to turn out, but I'm very confident that we'll have some reasonable success, if not wild success, with that program. It's the right direction.
One thing that happened that what I found interesting was that raft of orders that was entered by the PUC just the day before clean energy. And although Mina Morita didn't talk about them, she had arranged beforehand that Jeff Ono, the consumer advocate, would talk about them. Bottom line is they really put the undersea cable down the road, as well as big wind. I mean, for investigative dockets, and that could be the end of both of those initiatives. And what's interesting about it is that if you don't have an undersea cable, and some people have always felt you don't need one and it's too expensive and all that, but if you don't have an undersea cable, you can't do geothermal outside of the Big Island. That's the reality of it. And that sort of changed, like you were saying, that changes the paradigm. It changes the way we're going to go forward here. And it's all based on this kind of assumption, the emerging assumption that each of the islands can be distributed. Each of the islands can have the technology to operate by itself. We weren't sure of that in the past, and maybe that's right, maybe it's wrong, maybe the jury's still out. But it seems to me that everybody's sort of coming to that slowly, maybe more quickly these days, coming to the conclusion that everybody can be on his or her own. I mean, every island can, like Kauai, Kauai is actually proof of the possibility that you can actually have the clean energy resources and deal with them and be satisfied by them island by island. I think that's what's coming out of all this.
Sure, and I think all the islands are offering that up. I think the point was made by Randy Alm that Helco is actually way ahead of everybody and you pointed out the reason is because of all the geothermal primarily they have over there. But they're doing a lot with PV, they're doing a lot with wind, they're doing some research with batteries. So great stuff coming out of Hawaii Island. And then certainly everybody knows that Maui is going gangbusters with wind, and they're having some challenges with integration. But that it's being worked on, whether it's just from system friction or all the discussions and back and forth between the PUC and MECO. I mean, there's real attention being paid to those issues. So, I think we can be positive that there's going to be some progress in those areas.
Yeah.
And then, Kauai is a whole different ballgame. I think, we are really blessed with having a cooperative, and it means it really has significantly different implications for, how we look at utility challenges and whether we compete with our utility or more likely collaborate with them. And so, that's the case over here, and it's a different thing.
Yeah, and a moment on Kauai. Kauai was always different, I'm sorry to say. I don't mean that in a pejorative way. I mean, it's just always different. It was different back when Kamehameha unified the islands. He never really unified Kauai, and I think that somehow at some level of the culture that still plays. And here again, Kauai is different. And in a funny way, I'm so impressed. A time when Sharon Moriwaki and me and Hawaii News Now came out and interviewed a whole bunch of people, most recently for the State of Energy program last year. One thing I was so impressed with was the democratic process. I know it's not without some tumult, but the democratic process that the cooperative provides. You can never say that the people are adverse to KIUC. They elect KIUC. It's a whole different kind of relationship. And it becomes, somehow it brings everything closer together. I don't know if that means that in the end it works better. You can tell me if it does, but it certainly is a very different system and a different relationship of the utility with everybody, the people. Yeah.
Well, it's easy for me to say that it works better. I think we still have a long way to go to prove it as an island, but I believe that the people who made that decision, a decade ago, made a great decision that really benefits Kauai. And bottom line is, they have returned a lot of money to members in terms of patronage capital, and they've done a lot of really positive things, and they've kept rates down. Although people see rates rising, they have risen less rapidly than the HECO company's rates on the other islands. So that's one piece of it. But I think that the bigger piece of it is that these energy challenges that we face are primarily about coming together to solve problems, and it's a whole lot easier to come together with a cooperative than it is with an investor-owned utility in a lot of cases. And I think it's inherent in a cooperative structure. You just like you said. I mean, we do elect the people who make the long-term decisions for the co-op. So there's plenty of times, Jay, and I will share this openly, that people have, there's been a group of people in one way or the other that's been unhappy with decisions made at KIUC, and it's never easy. But nobody said it would be easy. It's what it is it's available and it's accessible to membership. People can get involved if they have the time, if they're willing to come to board meetings, if they're willing to lobby their board members for and advocate for their positions. And so it's a lot more of a direct connection, and I'm very excited about the potential. I think Mayor has made it a point to make sure that we maximize collaboration with KIUC, and that's what we're intending to do.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, it's an ongoing conversation. It's a conversation where the people take ownership. And one thing about clean energy, especially clean energy, because it's different than regular energy, is that it affects all of us. It is ours whether we like it or not. It's going to change our lives. It is changing our lives. It's going to change our community and our economy and all that. And if we just turn our backs on it and say, well, you guys handle it and I'll criticize you later, that's not really a good way to go. The better way to go is to have an ongoing conversation. And as you pointed out, that in Clean Energy Day we were doing that, and there's indications that the state in general is doing that, but certainly that's what happens in Kauai, because you have the election process, and when this election process takes place, everybody is talking about energy. So you have this ongoing level of conversation all the time, which I think is very healthy.
Absolutely.
Anyway, putting that aside, you're having a big conversation coming soon in your conference on Kauai. You're organizing a conference specific to Kauai and on Kauai about clean energy. Tell us about it: when, where, what, and so forth.
Well, the conference is hosted by the Kauai Economic Development Board, and I think this is their 6th year hosting the conference. This is the first time I've had the pleasure of working with them to help organize it, and they're really doing a phenomenal job. So we are excited. It's the theme of this year's conference is After Oil, Managing the Transformation. The conference is going to be on August 15th at the Kauai Marriott Resort and Beach Club. And it's going to be an all-day conference. So we're very excited to get into the community and get people to come in and join the conversation. We'll have, I think, five separate panel discussions that happen over the course of the day that I think will be really, really interesting for people. And the hope is that we can just take the opportunity to get the community onto the same page and to share ideas and share what's going on this year on Kauai and the progress we've made, the challenges we've had, and then the opportunities for tomorrow. So there's some really interesting discussions.
So what are the subjects of the panels, and what's the tenor of the speakers?
It's a great group of people, and we expect there to be some really interesting discourse. The first panel of the day is setting the context, and we're going to get Randy He, who's a former CEO of KIUC, to come up and talk about the kind of the history of the grid a little bit and some of the legacy systems in place. He and Alan Smith, who is actually current chair of the board, are going to give a sense for people about how we got to where we are today, in terms of the evolution of the plantation towns and the grid in those towns and the hydro resources that are legacy systems that have been in place for 100 years.
Oh, that's
We're going to go from there.
Great discussion, because
they
forget history so quickly and they sort of lose their way. But if you base it on what happened before, then you have more robust understanding. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the things it's really ironic, and I think everyone here is aware, but it's something that passed us by, is that, for a long time the plantations carried a huge portion of the energy generation with the gas, and as they went out over the years, we became more and more oil dependent, and all of a sudden one day we woke up and here we were, sucking 90% of our oil out of a pipe or out of a barge, and then the next thing you know, the price spiked, and we all know the rest from there. But it's interesting to see how that happened prior to our acute pain with the price of oil. The next panel discussion is going to focus on the challenges and benefits of today's renewables and kind of what we learned so far. There's been a lot of work and discussion put into a couple of different sources on Kauai. Biomass in particular, there's a project underway, and we're going to talk about that. Hydro is something that's always gotten attention, and KIUC is hoping to put more hydro on the grid. Overall, we're going to have KIUC's production manager actually get up there and talk about managing all the different resources. And then as well, Kelly King from Pacific Biodiesel will be there to give us a little bit of background on the role of biofuels and that whole thing. So that's the second panel. It promises to be a good one. You might notice that PV is left out of that second panel, Jay, and I'll tell you the reason is because later in the day we are going to have a panel discussion specifically focused on the issues around PV and what we're calling the good, the bad, and the ugly of managing one of the nation's most PV-dense grids.
So I'm not sure you're saving it. You're saving it for best.
Well, that one, I mean, I think they're all going to be really good discussions, and there's a lot to learn. But that one will be the one I think that really gets people fired up and people's attention. And there's a lot of contentious issues, but important issues to deal with. I think they surfaced a little bit at Clean Energy Day, actually, where we were talking about some of the potential social equity issues that relate to high PV penetration, and everyone's desire to get more PV on the grid, but an understanding that we have to do it under the right price structures and we have to do it under the right rate structures and all that. So it should be a great discussion. We're going to have, I haven't mentioned some of the really all-star panelists that we're going to have for some of these things.
Go ahead. So why don't you throw some names at me?
Sure. The PV discussion is going to include Mark Duda, who I'm sure you know well,
oh, sure.
and so Commissioner Mike Champley is going to be on that panel with Mark as well.
Really, that's unusual that a commissioner, PUC commissioner, would be on the panel. Good for him for speaking out.
He's got to he'll be great, and CEO David Bissell of KUC is going to be on that panel as well. So we've got Mark representing the PV industry, and David representing the utility, and Mike doing what he does, representing the judge, I guess. So.
Yeah, well, that's kind of that's unprecedented, but it's great to hear that he's doing that, and it's great to hear he's doing it in Kauai. And it's great to hear you having such an engaged panel in Kauai, all the panels. So
So
go ahead.
Well, I mean that's one of a number of panels. They're all really wonderful people out. Another one that we're lucky to have some people coming over from Oahu for is the panel called "Getting Traction on Energy Efficiency: Tools for Getting Energy Efficiency Out of the Mud," and we had a little fun with the subtitle there. But that's going to be moderated by our own Mike Tressler from Grow Farm, and we're going to have Mark Matheson, who you know from Hawaii Energy, SAIC, who is leading the OnBill financing charge, to give us a background on that, and then another PUC commissioner, Lorraine Akiba, is going to join us on that panel to talk
about two of them.
Two of them to talk about the role of energy efficiency. So in the state and how that applies to Kauai. So and then some other panelists as well that we're still working out, but really exciting discussion going to be happening there. I can't tell you, I mean, these are two, but there are others. There's one at the end of the day that I have the privilege of moderating, which is going to be, which is titled "Transforming Kauai's Energy Sector," and it's perspectives on our energy future and how to get there. And so that one is a conversation with four people who really have, we expect, a really unique and dynamic perspective on what the future might look like for Kauai. And what we're hoping to do is give a vision of what's possible. And we want to share, different perspectives. We're not kind of holding anyone to a particular line saying, from your perspective, what's it going to look like. And so real all-star lineup on here. Rick Rocheleau, who you know from HNEI, is going to present one of the perspectives. Yeah. There's a gentleman named Eric Wojciech, who I met last year at the ACEEE conference. Eric is affiliated with a group called the Energy Collaborative. That's TEC, the Energy Collaborative, and has also done a lot of work with the California PUC over the years and some of the big consulting firms that work in that area. Matthias Fripp, who is a professor of electrical engineering at UH, and really has a lot of knowledge and understanding about the potential of the smart grid, is going to join us. And then because we couldn't leave out our patron saint of renewable energy on Kauai, PUC Chair Mina Morita is going to join that panel as well.
That's three.
So that's all three. So they're all going to be here sharing in a really healthy discussion. And so we're very excited. We're very blessed that they're able to make it over. And if they're listening, thank you for all giving your attention for the day to Kauai.
Oh, and, wow, what a program. You got some star-studded casts over there. So
indeed.
What is it, what kind of audience are you looking for? Are you trying to get people to come over from Oahu and other islands?
We would love to have people come over from Oahu. Yeah, really what we want to do is we want to just mix it up and get ideas and share ideas and just all the things you do at a conference, network, all that stuff. And our view is that just like the other islands, Kauai has something unique to offer, and it's a great place to be looking at, what are the possibilities and how can we solve the problem of renewable energy? How can we bring about clean energy Kauai style? So we between myself and my neighbor island colleagues, we all like to kind of knock off of each other in terms of what we think is most exciting, and we have fun with it. So this is our chance as Kauai to kind of get up on the stage and say, this is how we think it should be done.
Oh, great idea. And then last panel, that really sounds like something I got to see. That discussion is so important to try to synergize all the conversation, all the issues, and look into the looking glass. Well, I hope I can get out to see that. I would say that's going to be a very important conference, and I think it will make a statewide contribution, actually, to bring all those people together for that kind of discussion. And I know that your panel will be the one that I would absolutely have to see.
I think they're all going to be great, but I appreciate that, Jay.
Yeah. Well, one thing it raises in my mind is this, going back to this whole thing about this distributed energy, island by island. I'm more optimistic about that than I have been in the past. I mean, I always operated on the assumption, and I'm interested in your thoughts about this, on the assumption that, in order to do distributed energy island by island, and integrate clean energy, which is non-firm, most of it, that you must have storage. That without storage, you're fighting a wall, a barrier, and you can't go all the way. And I've always felt that way, and I've always wondered whether there's somebody out there, maybe at UH, who's got a little transistor about half an inch big that stores a lot of energy, and you put lots of them together, and presto, you have something way beyond a lead acid battery, and you can put it anywhere and so forth. That hasn't happened yet. Whoever invents that kind of thing would be a very wealthy person. But putting that aside, I mean, it's sort of a wonderful possibility, but putting it aside, I think what's happening is the grid, I mean, in Kauai and everywhere, has now got new kinds of technology, new kinds of techniques to deal with, non-firm power, and to smooth it out to a large extent, and to bring the conventional generators online as needed on demand, so that you can actually keep on integrating clean energy into the system with a more sophisticated and responsive grid, to the point where you're going a long way toward including the clean energy and reducing the actual time on taking a load for the conventional generators. And so I think we're getting there without the transistor. I think we're getting there without the lead acid or the reservoir hydro storage power. Little by little, we're actually developing technologies, deploying technologies that will let us do this even without solving the storage problem. What do you think?
Well, I think it's just a classic case of both and. I think it is very likely there's going to be more storage on the grid, and I know that KIUC has some really smart people in there on their grid management side that look at batteries and other storage means as with real potential. I think they've talked about the potential for pumped hydro storage on island, and it's something they're really eager to deploy. A technology that's tried and true. They obviously have some batteries on the grid to regulate frequency, and I think they're gaining experience with that. But then, the thing that to me is really untapped and something that gets me excited, and I have to, give my disclaimer that I'm not a smart grid engineer, and so I don't always have my brain as wrapped around this as is humanly possible. But I see the potential, and that is the grid becoming more interactive, as we're all familiar with two-way metering, and the idea that the customer and the load can start playing a much more engaged role in how to and managing the grid and managing renewables. I remember listening to someone 3 or 4 years ago, Doug Hausman, actually from Internext, was giving a presentation on the smart grid in the early days when we were all still trying to figure out what it meant, and he talked about something that really stuck out to me, and he said, the transformation is about going from a load following utility to a supply following utility. And if you really think about that, that is a very interesting proposition. I mean, we're talking about years and years and years of being able to basically dial up and down the power from a fuel source, and all of a sudden now you're actually trying to create a system that responds to the availability of a renewable source, which is intermittent and variable. And so big transition, requires communications, requires engagement by those that use the power. But the potential of that when you start really getting in there is just tremendous.
Yeah, that's it. It takes this kind of collaboration, not just talk, but actual collaboration, trading of information, a two-way street on everything involved in the grid, and then maybe this can happen. I mean, in the near term. Maybe it can happen without the undersea cable. Maybe it can happen without storage. Just everybody in each island using a lot of PV. That's your favorite thing, I know. But somehow making it work 24/7. That's where I think we're going. I think you and I are really saying the same thing, and I'm delighted to see it pop up that way. Although I was a little sad to see us drop big wind, and a little sad to see us drop or at least push the cable down the road. I think there are other things coming in now that will actually solve these problems using collaboration, as you say. So
Right.
I guess you're going to cover all of this in the program, by the way, right?
I don't know if we're going to cover it all, but we're going to hopefully just launch into the discussion and let it carry forward from after the conference, because it's going to be an ongoing challenge for the next decade or two. So, if we can get to 100% local sustainable energy by 2030, which is actually a goal that was a vision that was set forth by the community when we did our Kauai energy sustainability plan a few years ago, then I'll feel pretty good. So it gives us a little bit of time, but it's an ambitious goal.
Yeah, well, what you guys do in Kauai has an effect everywhere else, because I think people are getting the idea that you're the laboratory of the laboratory, you know what I mean? And the laboratory looks to you like the laboratory,
right, yeah.
The front-end laboratory.
Yeah.
So, okay, but what are the negatives that you've got to work with? I mean, sure, there's a tumult in democracy and all that. And there are issues about cost, and I always say that looks like the Clean Energy Initiative is at risk of being transmuted into the Cheap Energy Initiative. And remember Robbie Ohm's comments. He's made these comments many times about how we really have to understand that it takes money to build new infrastructure, and because it's clean does not necessarily mean it's cheap. Because it's clean, you have to put some money into the infrastructure, and that's not necessarily cheap. So anyway, I'm interested in your thoughts about the challenges, the problems, the barriers, the things you're going to have to work through to get to a place where we can feel comfortable about this.
Well, there's a couple of thoughts that come to mind, with that introduction of the problem. And it's such a big subject, and I think the first thing you got to say is there are so many people involved in so many different roles, and so you're getting one perspective from one person, and I always want to put that out there, because I can't say enough good things about the tremendous work happening at KUC. I can't say enough good things about the tremendous work happening at the state level and with PC and with everybody involved in the Clean Energy Initiative who's really trying to reinvent. And I think that's right. It is a reinvention. It's a transformation. So it's not an easy process. But when you look at what's happening fundamentally, Robbie, I think, brought up natural gas in the conversation at Clean Energy Day, and I recall thinking to myself, the reason we're getting away from oil is two-part. One is that we are all aware of the emissions issues and whatnot. Two is the cost, but there's also the issues of where the impacts are placed. And so for a long time, we have been able to get our energy, our electricity, without ever seeing the impacts. And that's whether they were drilling for oil in Nigeria, or whether they were digging a big pit in the tar sands of Canada, or fracking in Pennsylvania. And now all of a sudden we're saying, hey, we're gonna take responsibility for this energy production. We're gonna put it in our own backyards, whether that be, Waikiki or Lanai or Molokai or the highlands of Maui. It doesn't matter. It's in our backyards, and the people who are going to be impacted are the people who have to make those decisions. And so it's not an easy process. It's not one that we necessarily have a system developed to resolve, but that's what we're building. And Kauai is doing the same thing as the rest of the state. We have this co-op to do it through as a mechanism, but it really is about engagement. And then, as far as clean versus cheap, I think the other part of the analysis that's really got to get built in there, and there's plenty of people, on the green business side who will give you the same spiel, is that we've got to be looking at the system economics as opposed to the economics for an individual. It might be a little more expensive per kilowatt hour, but if our overall island economy is better off because we're exporting less dollars, isn't that a win, Jay? To me, that's a win. And we've got to actually build that into our accounting systems, because today we don't. Today we just say, yeah, well, it's good to hire local, but end of the day, we want it to be cheaper. Well, what is cheaper? And I think those are issues that everybody's struggling with. I think the consumer advocate is, Jeff Ona in recent comments has talked about, how do we look at the issue of cost versus really broader societal benefit, as have others. So it's not an easy thing to tackle.
Well, but to me, I think there's tipping points happening, and I say that in plural because I think there's not just one tipping point. There are a number of tipping points where the public has not understood, or worse, the public has gone down the wrong path, and come up with an idea about the initiative that's just dead wrong. Somehow, whether it's the press or them being ill-informed or uninformed. And I think that right now, it seems to me like things are coming back to a balance, and we're tipping in the right direction. I think the public is getting the idea that, we will have to pay for this. It is getting the idea that it is critical to our economy and has to be attended to, and we all have to collaborate. I mean, I don't think these ideas were really permeated into the community, say 2 or 3 years ago. And I think we were at risk of going the wrong direction on lots of things. But I think now we're reaching critical mass on public understanding. What do you think in Kauai about this?
I could say that you're right, but I can also say that there are a number of projects right now that KUC is really struggling with. Frankly, that are good, potentially very good projects for the community, but that they're having a real hard time, getting the word out on. And so it's always going to be about communication at some level or another, and about empowerment, and really, instead of talking to people, it's about talking with people. And those are not, you can say it, and I can say here that that's what needs to happen, but it's not easy to do. We need to build better models for collaboration, and I've been struggling with that for a long time, Jay. Before I got into the line of work I'm in, I did this as a volunteer, as a community advocate for renewable energy.
When we first met, you had just joined the board of KIUC, as I recall.
That's right. I just joined the board, but I spent 3 or 4 years before that as the chairperson for a local grassroots community energy group called Apollo Kauai, and all we did was educate and advocate, and that education was both of ourselves and of our community members, and then advocated, and we did it for years, and we made some progress. But I mean, when you're talking about a community as a whole, it's not as simple as just getting a word out and everybody knows it. It takes time. So,
well, this goes. This goes to really. I mean, it's not just in Kauai, but I've come to believe that the American form of democracy, in fact, the world perception of democracy has changed. The internet has probably done a lot to change it, where people can get involved, and be right or wrong. You can go either way on that kind of thing. But at least the democracy is becoming grassroots on more issues than it ever was before. Unfortunately, sometimes people don't understand the larger question and the larger benefits and prices. And I'm wondering whether those projects you talked about that were at issue in Kauai, whether there's a NIMBY factor in that, or what? What are the arguments that play on trying to do or stop a project in Kauai on clean energy?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that people have to do, and probably the hardest thing to do, is to let go. You gotta when you go out to a community and you say, hey, we want to try something. I mean, you got to just go out there with an open slate and say, here's what we're trying to achieve, and here's what we're trying to do it. And it's, anytime you go into those conversations, as there's always, years, decades, and some, in some instances, centuries of history that are behind how people react to what we're trying to do. So it's really a matter of, it's not so much just learning how to communicate; it's learning how to be a community again. I mean, we are fractured in a lot of ways, and I think there's the smaller islands that they have a tighter sense of community just by geography, so they're able to really have that, and that's sometimes different in the larger environments, but I think it's there everywhere. I mean, everyone feels like this is home, and everyone cares for the place tremendously and wants to do what's right for everyone. And it's just a matter of how do you move through a discourse to get to those decisions. It's not easy. No,
it's not easy. And one thing, and this is another tipping point. I think people have really not integrated the notion that we're under pressure here. We're under a time pressure. and that if we don't do anything, if we don't deal with the oil issue pretty soon, we're going to be victim to it, and it's going to damage our economy in more profound ways than it already has damaged our economy. I believe it's already damaged our economy, and once people get the idea, once we cross that tipping point, and the public understands that if they want to take an adverse position, if they want to stop a project that that is going to build clean energy, they're actually taking a risk that might be greater, than maintaining the status quo. I'm sorry, maintaining the status quo is a greater risk than moving ahead on a project, because the status quo is not going to be sustainable when oil prices go up. So, people have to understand that.
You're right, and if people are going to be critical, I think if we're going to come out and say, hey, this doesn't work, we have an obligation to then say, here's what might work, right, as opposed to just saying no to this and I have nothing else to say. There's got to be an alternative, and that's how you get to solutions. So it ain't easy, as you know well, as you guys, as the whole sector knows well. I mean,
what comes to mind, though, in the whole vein is the economic analysis, namely that if we are collectively paying, I don't know what it is, $6 billion or $7 billion in say transportation and generation oil in a given year, and we instead of doing that, instead of spending that money offshore, we kept it, or at least a substantial part of it. What would that happen to the economy? I don't think people really see that. If I said, well, half of it would now be disposable income in your pocket somehow, or in our collective pocket, then what would happen to the economy? The economy would obviously be better. You know what they say, I mean, a community that has ready, available, stable, and hopefully cheap energy is going to be a better economy by definition. And so that's where we will go. And I think if people understood that, they would really march a little quicker toward the goal.
Mm-hmm. You got to be right. I got to believe that you're right.
So what about Kauai? I mean, how would this work in Kauai? I mean, Kauai is, it's largely a hospitality industry place. Am I right?
Yes, you are.
It's volatile and vulnerable because of that. So if I gave you back half of what you spend on energy, how would it affect the economy of Kauai?
It would have tremendous benefits. I mean, if we look at KUC as an example, they buy on the order of $100 million a year in petroleum products to power the grid. And for Kauai's economy, that's a lot. We're obviously a lot smaller than Oahu, so that's a big, big chunk of money. And with their goal of 50% renewable energy, which they seem in line to achieve by 2023, that number is cut in half, right? We're talking about half the energy coming from local sources. So there'll still be some capital payments and some outside investment, but it won't be going on a barge, offshore. And so that's going to be a big impact. And then, the thing that gets really exciting is if you say, okay, what about that next 50%? What about, instead of just looking at an additive analysis on a bunch of projects that are going to get us to 50% renewable energy, what if you really start looking at a transformation? What if the system is different in 10 years than it is today fundamentally? What's the spin-off from that? Are we then in a position to export our expertise to the other islands and into the mainland? Do we have the opportunity to be more technology based in terms of what we do and develop here? Are there software development opportunities? I mean, there's so many veins of it, and it's a function of our situation. We've got this brutally high cost of electricity, highest in the state, or not highest in the state, but very close, right? So higher than Oahu and Maui, sometimes higher than Hiko or Helco, other times not, and then certainly Lanai and Molokai know the kind of pain that we experience with high rates. But as much of a negative that is, it's also a positive, because we have this opportunity to solve the problem and that much more leverage in terms of the cost to do it. And so it's a very exciting place to be.
You can be nimble. That's what I admire.
That's something.
Go ahead.
That's something David Bissell has really made a point of in the last couple of years, and I think he was right on when he said, we're going to retool and we're going to be nimble. We're going to take opportunities, and that is fundamental. Is like, the things are changing so fast. It's hard to make big, giant infrastructure decisions that have 20-year impacts when the industry is changing in 5-year cycles. But he said, hey, we're going to do that, and I think he's done a good job, and I think that the island of Kauai is reaping the benefits, and I think that Mayor Carvalho is doing the same thing. He's saying, hey, we're going to take opportunities as they come, but we're also going to push. We're going to look for places to explore and learn. And that's why I love my job. We get to test things all the time, on a smaller scale certainly than the utility does, but we get to push and test and find out ways to solve problems. So it's all good stuff, Jay.
It's all very exciting, and you talk about transformation. Indeed, there can be no other word that's more apt to describe what's happening in clean energy. But one, I will tell you, I used to say, plus ça change, plus la même. The more things change, the more they stay the same. I don't say that anymore. Now I just say plus ça change. I say everything is changing, and you can't assume that anything's going to stay the same. And so transformation, implies that everything is changing. And as we go down the path of clean energy, as Kauai does and all the other islands in their own way, and they're all different, it'll be interesting, it will be interesting at your conference to make the comparison about how each island looks at it and how each island handles these issues. That would be in itself a fascinating conversation. But if you say that this is a transformation, and certainly it is, you're saying that it's more than energy, because every transformation, by implication, by definition, transforms ripple effect things. I mean, for example, you talked about the possibility of inventing software and having like a tech industry around energy, which I would love to see. But there's much more than that. It's having more disposable income. It's having a different society. As we change energy, we change fundamental things in the way our society works. And that's what's really exciting and compelling about it. And I know that you're involved in that, and someday I hope you still talk to me. We'll look back down the road and say, well, we at least knew the pioneers, guys like you, who changed our world, who changed our islands, who changed our relationship with the community around us. That's what's happening, don't you think, Ben?
I do, and I think it's everybody. I think that's the magic, is that it's no longer up to just some experts in a closed room. I think people are getting involved, and everyone has something to share in order to solve the problem, in order to be part of the solution. And it's very exciting, Jay. So I hope people can make it over to our conference, and really mahalo for letting us talk to you on the show. And let's look back in 10 years and 20 years and remember what it was. That's a great thought.
Thank you, Ben Sullivan. It's Ben Sullivan, the Energy Commissioner in Kauai. We're talking about clean energy in Kauai, just taking stock here and talking about his conference coming up. It's on August 15th. Ben, how can you sign up for the conference?
You want to go to kedb.com, which is Kauai Economic Development Board, and on their homepage you'll see some information over on the right margin that'll lead you to the conference. And sign up. It's $50. It's actually $40 if you sign up before August 5th. So great value, lots of information. They're going to serve lunch and the whole bit, and it should be very, very interesting.
Wish you well in every particular event. Thanks so much for joining us today.
All right, aloha.
Aloha.